Yo, what's going on? So today I want to talk about arpeggiators. I think arpeggiators kind of get a bad rap sometimes in that people think they're not super versatile, or they can be kind of cheesy sometimes, like they just sound like a classic 80s track. But today I want to talk about how I actually use arpeggiators and how you can make some pretty funky rhythms with arpeggiators. To do that today, we're going to be using the Elektron Digitone and the SP404SX. I did a video on this setup previously, you can check it out right here, but basically I have the audio of the Digitone going into the SP404, and then the SP404 is going right out to the speakers. And then also have the MIDI out of the Digitone going into the MIDI in of the SP404. That way we can sequence the drums from the SP404 pattern sequencer, which I like a lot. But again, I did a whole video on that, so check it out if you want to learn more about the setup and how it can be used. But just to get right to it, one of the things I really like to do when it comes to sort of house beats or bouncy, faster tracks is I like to use arpeggiators to actually sequence my bass lines. So just to start us off that we can build a track on a little bit to demonstrate this, I made a sequence on the Digitone, just a little drum pattern, which is controlling the SP404. Nothing too special, but here's how it sounds. So just to start us off, I'm going to lay down a really simple chord progression on top of that drum pattern. I'm just going to do 2 chords because I want to make sure that we can really hear what this bass line's doing. So I'll keep it super simple in terms of everything except the bass line. As you can see right now, I'm set on a specific key for the Digitone, and it's in the key of F. To do that, you just press this music note right here on the Digitone, and as you can see, I'm in the key of F, and it then takes out every note that isn't in the key of F. This will just make it a little bit easier to come up with a chord progression and a bass line that are in the same key, which I'll get into a little bit more once we get to that bass line. But we'll start off just using these notes to create a chord progression, super simple, and then we can add that bass line on top. Let's do it. And then now on track 1, I have this bass sound loaded up. As you can hear, it's really sort of percussive. It has a hard hit at the beginning and tails off really quickly. That's because we're going to be using the arpeggiator, it's going to have a lot of frequent hits, and it's going to be really rhythmic. And for that reason, you want something that's sort of like really sharp. But first thing I'm going to do is just turn on the arpeggiator on the Digitone, which is just function and then the music note. Now if I play a note, it's going to just continuously play. And actually, if I go into the arpeggiator menu, it shows that we're on 1/8 setting, which means it'll play every 8th note. You can also turn that up to 10th, 1/12th, 1/16th, and it'll just play a little bit faster. And then vice versa. So the first way that you can kind of come up with hoppy bass lines with this method is just playing in each of the individual notes that we have on this scale. Like I said before, because we're in the key of F, as long as we play the highlighted notes, and in fact it won't even let us play anything else, we'll be in the same key as those chords. So it's kind of a safe way to just try to get some ideas on what you might want your bass line to sound like. So for example, if I press play, we now have the drums and the chords playing. If I play one note, it'll just play a single note sort of bass line. But then I can start adding in additional notes, which it will then automatically sequence as our bass line. And that's just kind of a cool way to develop ideas and thoughts on what you might want your bass line to sound like. But now to get into how I really like using arpeggiators to make bass lines, especially on the Digitone, I'm going to go into the arpeggiator menu of the Digitone, which is just function and synth 1, and you'll see that we're able to completely design the notes of the arpeggiator on this page. So for example, right now we have just a single line of notes, so if I play one note, it will just go through each of those notes. But let's say I go to the second note and I turn that to a higher note, go to the next one, change the note of that one, and just continue to sort of sequence the arpeggiator this way. Now when I go to play the arpeggiator again, I'm only going to press one note, and it plays multiple notes just based on what we sequenced. So because of this, we can completely design our bass lines using this sort of sequencer of the arpeggiator. There's one major rule that you have to follow when doing this in order to make sure, again, that you're in the same key as your chords. This is because when we press the highlighted notes right now, no matter what, we're going to be in the key of F, which is the same as the chords. However, when we're in this sort of arpeggiator design page on the Digitone, we can change each of the steps by a semitone. Therefore, it won't necessarily be in the same key as our chords. So in order to make sure you are in the same key, I'm just going to pull out the keyboard to just demonstrate this for a second. So the easiest way to explain this is by using the key of C, because we know that any of the white notes on the keyboard is in the key of C. So when it comes to the count of the microtones that you go up by on the arpeggiator is, let's say our first note C in this example is going to be 0. It's a 0 change on the arpeggiator menu. And then for the next note in the key, we go up 2 notes, 1, 2, and that means you'll be able to do 2 notes up on the step sequencer as well in the arpeggiator menu. Again, 2 more notes, so that would be 3, 4, you can go up 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and then 12 will be that original note, C. So just to go over that quickly again, you can go up 0, 2, 4, 5, 7, 9, 11, or 12. And as long as you're using those intervals in the arpeggiator, you'll be in the same key as that root note. So now with that in mind, let's just create a sequence using those intervals and then see if we can come up with something in terms of a bass line that will work well with this pattern. Let's see what we can do. So to start off, I'll just go up 5 semitones because that's one of the intervals we could do. And then I'll do 12, let's say. And then let's do 4. And then let's do 2 and 4, let's say. And I'm just coming up with these randomly. Once we play them in, we'll see how it sounds and see if we like the pattern. And let's say 9. And then I'll just leave this one where it is. It'll be that root note. And then lastly, let's do 4. So now I'll make this an 8-step sequence, an 8-step arpeggiator. And to do that, I'll just have to turn down the length of the arpeggiator. So now that I've sort of programmed in this arpeggiator, I'll play the chords, play this bass line on top just by pressing that root note, and then we'll just see how it sounds. We can then go in and make changes if we don't like how it turns out. Let's see how it sounds. See what I mean? And just like that, I feel like we came up with a funky bass line that works really well with this speed and this type of track that otherwise I probably wouldn't have come up with, because I would have had to do a lot of different notes in that single bar. But because I used the arpeggiator, I was able to just use those 8th notes and design them individually. I actually really like how this sounds, so I don't think I'm going to make any changes. But now if we wanted to, we could just go ahead, record that single arpeggiator in, and it would be a really cool bass loop for our track. But now the last and most important reason to me that I really like using arpeggiators to create bass lines is that you can create polymeters by changing the length of the arpeggiator. What a polymeter is in sort of simple terms is you have 2 instruments going on at the same time. Right now we have, let's say, the chords and we have the bass. And if we have both of those instruments playing the same tempo but different bar lengths, it's a polymeter. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to shorten the length of the arpeggiator pattern on the bass line. And what that will do is we'll have the chords, drums, and bass all playing the same tempo, but the bass line is going to have a different length bar than those 2 other instruments. And I'll show you what that sounds like. It does something really cool and gives a lot of movement. So let's take that pattern length and I'll put it down to rather 8, I'll do it 7. And this is what it's going to sound like just on its own. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And when I play it on its own, it sounds pretty normal, but now I'm going to play the chords and I'm going to play the bass on top of that. And then listen to how the bass correlates with the drums and with the chords. 1, 2, 3, 4. You'll notice that the first note of that bass line rarely lines up with the first note in the bar of the drums or the chords. And what this does is it takes a pretty simple pattern. We just have sort of a really simple bass line and even more simple chords, and it gives it a lot more movement. We just took a pattern that was maybe like 3 bars, let's say, and we turned it into a pattern that's probably over 50, because the amount of times that the first note of the bass line is going to line up with the first note of the chords or the drums, making it the same pattern twice, it's going to be a lot of bars in order to do that. So now I think we should just add in this polymeter bass line onto the track, and then we can keep working on the track a little bit, add some texture, but I really just wanted to demonstrate how you could use the arpeggiator to sort of achieve these polymeters. Alright, I hope you like how this beat turned out, and I hope this showed that you can use arpeggiators in more ways than just creating leads. You can actually do bass lines and different polymeter sounds. But if you liked the video, make sure you give it a thumbs up and let me know in the comments what you want to see in a future video. But I really appreciate you guys hanging out. Thank you so much for making music with me and chilling, and I can't wait to see you guys again in the next video. Peace.